I want to give you an idea about blockchain, and I want to get you to think about it from the point of view of design. I don't particularly want to go into cryptocurrency specifically. Now, obviously, we're going to have to, at some point, understand it. This isn't a talk about how to speculate, which ICOs to back, and none of that. These are the questions that you, if you are a game designer, need to think about when you are going through the process of deciding how you're going to use the blockchain technologies. I am really interested in what blockchain as a technology can do for games. If you talk to people at GDC, which I did, half of the people think that cryptocurrency, blockchain is a Ponzi scheme. Half of the people think it's the most amazing disruptive technology we've ever seen. It's somewhere between the two. Our job as designers is to make sure it works for our users to make amazing games. That's what I'm interested in. So you could think about cryptocurrency from the point of view of payment and various other things. And we're going to try and talk about what does it actually mean for us. For me, the blockchain technology does something magical. It takes what was amazing about the internet, digital items, digital distribution, and makes it possible to have one of. Now, you think about that idea. So if I have a game, I can duplicate it completely and without error. If I have a picture, a video, a piece of music, I can duplicate it without error and have infinite numbers of copies of them. In fact, as soon as content is available, it is available to everybody. We know this, piracy, etc., etc. Now we can have one of them. Now that's powerful. That adds some really interesting connotations. But it's not just that it's one of them. We don't need a single authority to tell us that this thing is right. Is it my beard scratching away?
Just a bit.
I thought it was my raspy voice. Better? Okay, so if it keeps doing that, just wave it. We say, oi, fix it. So if we're going to have one of these things and identify it, and you have this no need for a central authority to prove things, then we can do peer-to-peer trading of those items, and it be trusted. Because we've got this distributed network of people who will check all the sums to make sure it all works. And I love the analogy that it's like making an omelette. It's lots of calculations, and every time you make the calculation, you break the egg. You can't unbreak an egg. But then we can also append history. We can add information in a controlled way to that. And we can add rules in a controlled way to that. That's the building blocks. That's our Lego pieces that allow us to be playful with what we do with blockchain. But it's not entirely without queries and questions. We have to think about the price of gas. Now, I mean, obviously, gas is particular to Ethereum. I don't know what this, I've been working in a space which has been backed by Ethereum. So we use gas to do the transaction. So there is a cost associated with every time you make a physical change. This is a big deal from a design point of view. It's hard to hide an action where there is a cost that has to be passed to the end user in every time they make an action. So if you think about what that means is when you want the consumer experience to work, you have to think about whether this is going to trigger an actual cost, a transaction they have to approve. And that takes time. It's not just the amount of currency and tokens it takes up, it's the amount of time that that process takes up, because it's not instantaneous. It's not like going to the App Store, pressing yes, and it installing. That convenience is incredibly important. And now we have to consider that it might take 20 seconds on a Bitcoin-based system. It might take 15 seconds on an Ethereum-based system, maybe 10 seconds on Litecoin. But it takes time. And it's not 100% guaranteed, necessarily. So we're adding uncertainty and delay to the user experience if we're not careful. We also have to think about how smart our smart contract is. We can set the rules about how this object can legitimately be changed or not. We have to think about what that means. But we also have to think about how often we allow changes and how big those changes are, because that will affect how slow and how much information is being transferred, and therefore the price of doing that, the cost to us of doing that. So you have to think about when you're designing blockchain to work for you, what the implications are of the layout of the information. There's a maximum file size that you can put. If you want to actually write a whole piece of game code and make that something that's locked and secured, I'm pretty sure, somebody might tell me from the fintech space, but I'm pretty sure that's going to cost more than a few strings in a JSON file. So you have to think about these kind of things. These are the kind of implications that you guys need to think about if you're going to consider using blockchain in your flow of your game. You also have to think about the promises you make. Think about that. Think about the specific things that you're going to say in your white paper if you're going to make your own coin. We did the company I'm consulting for called Reality Clash did their ICO, their ICO, however you want to say it, in August. Raised something like 900 Ethereum, which was something like $3.5 million or something like that at the time. Some ridiculous amount anyway. But they made a lot of promises about making a game which will be location, first-person shooter, AR game, running on Apple and Android. And anyone who knows anything about the App Store, they're not particularly keen on blockchain at the moment. So you have to be really careful if you're going to make promises you're going to make this available, because you've got to work out how you're going to fulfill them. Because there are companies out there who are making promises that cannot be done. And any attempt to do them, Apple, for example, will just say, no, go away. And if your whole business is based on Apple or Android saying yes or no, or even Steam saying yes or no, you make sure that you've worded it in such a way where you can design it appropriately for the rules of the platform. That's just one of the considerations. There are lots of things to consider to make sure that how do you respond as regulation comes into force? And I'm sure it will. I don't know exactly how it will. I hope it's done carefully. But the question is it a security? Is it a utility? What other monetary system will be used to try and decide how to govern transactions that happen through this process? And we're in the Wild West. Nobody knows what that will look like. And there are lots of pros and cons to each of the potential systems out there. If you're going to make digital assets, you don't even have to make them using your own system. There are platforms out there that you can use already going through their processes. Something like Terra Virtua is a VR world. In fact, it's very similar to PlayStation Home, if I understand it right, where there is a virtual world, you go and you make things inside that world, and then you sell those assets through that environment, all backed with blockchain. Blockchain that's based on their currency. That's a perfectly legitimate way to work. And you may find this increasing number of studios finding these kind of platforms really useful. You know, the teams like BitGood, I think, are still doing their ICO right now. Not sure. They were definitely doing it recently. They may have just finished it, but I knew they were doing it soon. There's also people like GameFlip. There's a whole bunch of teams out there. In fact, there's an awful lot of people looking to find ways so you can resell the digital assets you own in the game to somebody else. Now, anyone remember gold farming in EverQuest? Anyone heard of that? Yeah, so famously, gold farming in EverQuest was a thing where basically you would buy an account from somebody else, and they would basically have spent time playing the game to earn money and build a character up for you, and then they could do minor trading. It ended up being a money laundering issue. Now, hopefully, with the blockchain model, that issue goes away, hopefully. Because if you have a smart contract and you can prove the source of the funds going into the pipeline, then we will be able to say that's a legitimate person, that's a legitimate trade, and we don't need to have an external body to govern that. But like I say, regulation is still to come. It's not entirely clear how it works. We'll either have platforms like these, like Wax, like BitGuild, like GameFlip, like Terra Virtua, with their own way of handling this, using their own currency, but I suspect that we've got a lot of change coming. It'll be very unclear who wins in this market. Let's talk about some specific games and how we can use the blockchain technology itself in the game. Yes, of course, we can use it to pay to play. There are a couple of platforms out there that are already being looked at. CoinMode and Etherplay are two examples. Some sort of drone thing, I guess, or something like that sounds like that going past us. Anyway, so the idea being that you've got these kind of mechanisms where you can put a token in and release the ability to play. Nice and easy. Of course, you've got the time to do that and the cost of the transaction, but in theory, that should all be fine. But we can go further than that and actually say, right, we're going to make our assets freely available and usable elsewhere, and each of them is going to be a blockchain item, a tokenized object that can be owned through these principles. So knowing that your game can have this sense of